Hello and welcome to the Centuries of Sound radio podcast. This one's from November 2018, features Sean, and covers the years 1890 and 1891. Centuries of Sound is a monthly mix of original music and sounds from a year in history. Right now we're up to 1927. To download full mixes and get a host of other benefits for just $5 a month, please come to patreon.com/centuriesofsound.
I thus address the world through the medium of the latest wonderful invention, Edison's phonograph, so that my voice, like my great show, will reach future generations and be heard centuries after I have joined the great and, as I believe, happy majority. P.T. Barnum.
The voice of P.T. Barnum there, welcoming us to another episode of Centuries of Sound. P.T. Barnum was a famous showman. He had various performing shows around the USA and other countries, and he's still a well-known name today, I believe.
Yeah, famously money-obsessed. He came up with supposedly came up with the phrase, "there's a sucker born every minute." Fabulously focused on making money. The circus that he founded folded only 2 years ago, 1 year ago, in 2017. So a long-standing American icon.
And with the film based on his life and his works is doing very well now. There's a musical.
Is that P.T. Barnum? Oh.
The Greatest Showman, whatever it's called. He did popularise the concept of the freak show, which has not been viewed particularly nice historically. I suppose it was work for people with disabilities at the time when they couldn't get any. Degrading, humiliating work. So one of many morally ambiguous things that we need to cover today, I'm afraid. In this show, we go back to a year in the history of recorded sound. This is really far back we're going right now. What year was that recorded in, do you think, Sean?
I think it was 1890.
It was 1890 indeed. 1890 and 1891 we're covering today because there's not really that much good recorded sound from 1890 and 1891. My name's James. I'm the creator of the Centuries of Sound website. And Sean is my co-host here, my historical expert, who'll be filling us in on some of the events that are happening in these 2 years. So let's talk first of all about the year 1890. Sean, what can you tell us about the year 1890?
Well, the year 1890 was still under Queen Victoria at this point. I still believe the Earl of Salisbury is Prime Minister, but widening towards the very late Victorian period. And really we're seeing... It's a time of recession. The Victorians like to refer to this period as the Great Depression. It's when we see working men's groups appearing. The Trades Union Congress now has 1.5 million members. By 1891, 1.5 million members of cooperatives. We learned from Charles Booth that over 30% of London's working class people lived in poverty. We're moving more towards that traditional view you have of the Victorian era of big cities with belching factories and all the rest of it. There's huge wealth, but there's also huge poverty, and actually that comes out in the political system. There's a great deal more radicalism. The growth of the Independent Labour Party is soon to emerge. Britain is moving from that self-confident 1880s towards a more questioning role of itself. It's questioning itself a lot more. Germany and the United States have overtaken England's industrial output and all the rest of it. So Britain's becoming a little less sure of itself in these years. We're heading more towards the classic 1900s, 1910s Great War era.
Yeah, so it's a time of change in Britain.
Yes.
We're not going to be going to Britain quite so much this time. We do have a few things from Britain later on. We're going to go to America first of all,
Yes.
where they are in the middle of the Gilded Age.
Yes.
And it's one of those times where some people are making a lot of money and some other people are in terrible poverty. Mm-hmm. Culturally speaking, we have quite a lot of different styles of music that are popular. The most popular music of all, though, we would call it maybe marching band music these days. If you go to one of these small towns, they have their local town band will have the latest music. It wouldn't be the sort of music you'd expect if you went to see an orchestra play. They obviously have less members than an orchestra and they can't play quite such sophisticated music as an orchestra. It's a simpler kind of music, but if you compare it to the more genteel classical music, it's almost like the rock version. It's got that kind of driving beat. It gets people up and excited. And the grand leader of all this is John Philip Sousa. Are you familiar at all with the works of John Philip Sousa?
I've heard his name before, but I couldn't tell you much of him apart from that.
John Philip Sousa was the leader of the United States Marine Band, and in that role, he wrote many of the kind of marches and military songs that you may have heard in many different places. One of the famous ones is the Monty Python theme tune.
Oh, really?
If you're familiar with that. And for these early years, we have Sousa's band recording quite a lot. They're one of the most popular recording artists of the day, but not John Philip Sousa himself. He was very suspicious of recorded music. He called it canned music, and he refused to participate in it in any way.
So this is like Britney Spears' backing act without Britney Spears.
In a sense, but he did have many of the best musicians coming through the ranks, so we'll get into those in later years, perhaps. Let's have one of the first recordings of Sousa's band. You might find this a familiar song. This is the Washington Post March. So, what do you make of Sousa's band?
Well, it's all rather rousing, isn't it?
It is very rousing indeed. Yeah.
So this would have been what the average working man would have listened to, or is this more of a middle class?
It depends where you go. I think this is going to the small towns around America. This is what they would listen to. If you're in the big cities, I think they have their other kinds of performances. We'll be getting into some of those a little later. But as far as John Philip Sousa and some other band leaders we'll be hearing go, this is maybe the most mainstream music of the time that you're getting recorded. It's interesting to see with these recordings, this kind of band music. Later on we'll see them, surprisingly enough, they're going to be the first people to adopt ragtime. They'll start to have kind of ragtime elements to them. And we'll have other bands which will start to appear, which are full-on ragtime bands, but they still kind of draw on that military band tradition. And those would become the first jazz bands. So it's strange. Strangely enough, you wouldn't think this sounds like it's going to turn into jazz, but you could do a mix of going through from this all the way through to jazz.
And would you have, in the United States, would you have white and African-American members? Certainly not in the South, obviously, but
of the same band, certainly not. Even into the jazz age, it didn't really happen until almost 1930. Into the 1930s. Somebody like Bix Beiderbecke, the first great white jazz performer, never played in a band with the other great jazz performers of the age, just because he was in white bands, which is really a shame because he was way too good for those.
Yes,
and he did play with like Louis Armstrong privately, but it was never recorded. It's really a shame. So let's go back to England for a little bit. We do still have some recordings from England from the year 1890. Last time we were talking about a guy called General Gouraud. Now, General Gouraud was Thomas Edison's agent in the UK, and he made a lot of recordings of famous people in the UK. Going into 1890, General Gouraud is still in the UK, still making recordings. He's been given a project to do, though. He has to raise money for the relief fund for veterans of the Light Brigade.
Ah, yes.
The Light Brigade, of course, are most famous for the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yep.
The charge of the Light Brigade was not in 1890. When was the charge of the Light Brigade?
Charge of the Light Brigade is part of the Crimean War in 1854. So this is about 27 years.
The charge of the Light Brigade, I guess people will be vaguely aware of what that is. Can you give us a bit more detail? What's the context of that?
So effectively, the charge of the Light Brigade is one of those seemingly British-only moments when we celebrate a terrific loss. It's effectively, Lord Cardigan's light cavalry are ordered to charge a retreating gun position, but they get the wrong end of the stick, either deliberately or through verbal miscommunication, we're not quite sure which, and they charge against a heavily fortified position, and they are all slaughtered. They actually manage to reach the cannons, but then have to turn round and run back again. So it's a complete national disaster, but in quite the same way as Dunkirk. Lord Cardigan becomes a celebrity, and it's kind of becomes one of those great icons of British manhood, as it were, duty and all the rest of it. Okay. So it's probably analogous to us raising money for veterans of, I don't know, what would it be now, Vietnam or something like that. So I suppose somewhat understandable, especially as in this point there is very little in the well of a welfare state. There's certainly no real national health service or even effective pension, really. So if you were disabled in the charge of the Light Brigade, fortunately you would be for life with very little assistance aside from begging.
So this is in order to raise money for them. We have first of all a speech from somebody else who became famous in the Crimean War. That's Florence Nightingale.
Yes.
We've heard the voice of quite a few famous people so far, but Florence Nightingale is the first one to understand how to really use her voice on record. Should we just hear what Florence Nightingale sounds like?
Let's.
As Florence Nightingale has standard to bear the pressure 1890, when I am no longer even a memory, just and vague, I hope my voice may perpetuate the great work of my life. God bless my dear old comrades of Balaclava and bring them safe to shore. Florence Nightingale.
And they're still doing that weird thing at the end where they say their name.
Yeah, that's still going on. They still have to say their name. Yeah. It is odd, yeah. It's the signature, audio signature. So what do you think of Florence Nightingale's voice there?
She sounds exactly like I thought she would do, which is kind of pleasing.
Yeah.
In a sense.
She is quite posh, obviously.
Yes, she is.
And stern and matriarchal.
Yes.
Interesting what she's saying there, saying that I hope in many years people will be able to hear my voice and remember my deeds. And that's exactly what happened.
But that's interesting, because I remember before we were saying that this kind of recording cylinder was used more almost as an aid memoir. If we're send a message and we'll get rid of it. There seems to be a shift now. People are thinking this will be preserved. And centuries later people will be listening.
She's quite insightful.
Yes, that was quite an interesting thing to hear.
So she's one of the great Victorians, Florence Nightingale.
She is.
She invented the pie chart.
Yes.
Not the pie chart, but some kind of pie chart, I believe.
Yes.
And she didn't start modern nursing.
No.
But, she is still the patron of the International Nursing College or something, I believe.
Yes, she is. I mean, controversially now, because, of course, we're recognising the great impacts people like Mary Seacole, who, of course, was a working-class woman of colour, had, that people liked to forget. She wasn't an upper-class woman. But obviously, Florence Nightingale is still a seminal figure, and her work on statistics, as well as her work on nursing, is quite impressive.
I think when we're listening to these things, you kind of have to remember you're looking at a perspective of the time, what they thought was important to preserve. So quite often it's not the same kind of thing that you want to preserve.
Absolutely not.
Another famous thing from the charge of the Light Brigade, this is the trumpeter, the original trumpeter Landfrey, playing the bugle call that he played on that fateful day. Something a little strange in what he says. See if you can pick that out.
I am Trumpeter Landfrey, one of the surviving trumpeters in the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava. I am now going to sound the bugle that was sounded at Waterloo and sound the charge that was sounded at Balaclava on that very same bugle.
Okay, there we go. That's the bugle charge that sent the Light Brigade out.
And apparently also the one they used at Waterloo, which is...
I don't know if it was the same bugle at Waterloo or not.
No,
and maybe that's what he meant, that it was going to be the same bugle they used both times.
I got out of it that I thought he used the same call as they used at Waterloo, which is interesting in of itself. That's 70 years later.
I guess he'd be getting on a bit at this time. Maybe he just forgot what he was doing. Yeah. There's no retakes at this time, so
no. Though they are fascinated with Waterloo in the Victorian period, it's entirely possible that they did use the same.
One other famous cultural artefact, of course, that comes out of the charge of the Light Brigade is the poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And I'm just going to play it now and see if you recognise it. This is the man himself reading the poem in last years of his life. Let's hear Alfred Lord Tennyson reading his poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay. So, sorry to interrupt Alfred Lord Tennyson a bit there. It's a bit of a shame. But let's discuss, as he reads his poem, the many famous lines there, the canon to the rest of them. There we go. That's the famous line. Cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, into the valley of death. What can you tell us about Alfred Lord Tennyson?
Well, Tennyson, of course, was poet laureate for most of Victoria's reign. He was one of the first official poets England Britain they ever had. He's an interesting character because people think of him as a kind of a poet of jingoism and imperialism, and in many senses he was, but he was also a Whig.
A Whig would be a liberal.
Yes, well, not quite that they became part of the Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. He's so fairly radical for his day, but he became more depressed about the state of Britain as his life went on. He wrote in, I believe it was 1835, a poem called Locksley Hall, which was a great triumphant view of English society and how it was evolving and how progress was on the march, very much a Whig perspective. But in 1886, he writes Locksley Hall 60 years on. His maths was a bit off. And effectively, when he said, now England and Britain is this threatened democracy, threatened by popularism and unenlightened working people who've been given the vote, and now they're going to be voting in demagogue politicians and all the rest of it. So he again, we get this sense from Lord Tennyson of the shifting of the optimism, the Whiggish optimism. The 1830s is shifting now. He became a very cynical figure.
Well, I was trying to place what his voice sounded like as we were listening to it a little there. And it reminds me of an interview with Enoch Powell, I remember from the 1990s. His voice sounds just the same, kind of a little bit confused. The kind of voice that you just don't... I don't think you get that anymore. I think that generation is gone now.
No, you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's probably the only person who sounds like that now.
Yeah, but he's special, of course. Let's move away from England now. Let's travel across the English Channel and then across the continent to Russia.
Yes, Russia.
Yeah, how's Russia doing?
Russia's an interesting mix. It has now freed the serfs. The serfs have been enfranchised, the last European nation to do so.
Good.
But it's still very much an autocracy. The State Duma, when it is called, has very little power. The Tsar is still an absolutist ruler. And it is a world of difference away from England. You'd go to England and Russia, you wouldn't believe they're in the same time period. But there is a great flowering of Russian music at this time. It's bizarre.
There is. Many famous composers, it's true.
And there's many theories as to that. Some say, well, since all the power is focused in one place near the Tsar, it means he can patronise all these great musicians, or simply, any number of reasons why Russia has this great flowering. But yes, but it's interesting that Tchaikovsky is most famous for his work on counterpoint, which of course is a counter-reformation, harking back to the medieval period. It's very complex, intertwined musics. So in many senses, you could argue Tchaikovsky is looking back to a period of history even in the 19th century that no longer exists. Yeah, well, let's kind of go over there then. Yeah. We have some quite impressive stuff from Russia. In 1890, of course, the technology to record is still very basic. We have these cylinder machines that Edison's making and sending all over the world with various people.
not all over the world, to a few locations only. But he has a fan in Russia, a Mr. Julius Bloch. He went over with an Edison recording machine and a stack of cylinders and started recording his friends. And his friends were all the different members of this elite society at the time, the famous composers and musicians. And he managed to record quite a lot of well-preserved and unbelievable recordings at this time of quite well-known people. The first one I'd like to play is not that well-known. It's Mademoiselle Nikita and Pyotr Tchaikovsky playing At the Fountain. The studio audience there very impressed with the performance, especially of Mademoiselle Nikita.
Yes, well,
I think an interesting thing to notice from this recording is that they were speaking in French at the beginning.
yes, I did notice that as well.
And they were calling her Mademoiselle Nikita. Because at this time, of course, I say of course, maybe people don't know this, that French was the international language, the lingua franca of the world. And if you were an educated Russian in society, you would speak French as much as possible. It's kind of strange to think these days.
Well, yeah, I mean,
how it went.
It's in the same way now that if you go to China, all the educated elite, if you want to get anywhere, will speak English.
From my experience, not always.
Not always, well.
Not always. But it was the prestige language.
Yes.
And if you read all those books by Tolstoy or they're all
Dostoevsky, it's a bit earlier,
Dostoevsky,
but...
Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, they're always speaking in French. They always have nice little phrases in French through those books. It's kind of strange. The most famous composer of all of them in Russia this time, as we've already mentioned, was Mr. Tchaikovsky.
Yes.
Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. I think there's a kind of cliche of Russians as being kind of masculine and like bear-like.
Butch, yeah.
But let's have a listen to Tchaikovsky and see if he sounds like that. Or very kind of intellectual and old-fashioned. Might be surprised.
Антонович говорит, сыграйте что-нибудь. Вы же поедете. Пожалуйста. Несколько аккордов. Пожалуйста, Антонович говорит, сыграйте. Lassen Sie sich entweichen. Gut, все устроится. Ну, маленький, пару аккордов.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was
Not what you expected.
not what I was expecting at all.
So Tchaikovsky was gay. He was very flamboyant and extravagant in his kind of mannerisms and quite ahead of his time in that sense. So
Might be a bit of Mr. Humphreys, I've got to be honest.
yeah, for sure. I mean, he's kind of playful. He's just larking around in front of a recording horn, and that's what he sounded like. He didn't record Tchaikovsky playing any music. He recorded him larking around in front of the microphone.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember last episode, all these great establishment British figures we found were all A, slightly drunk, and B, trying to say all this, what I presume they thought was incredibly profound things.
No.
He just it's quite a nice picture, to be honest. Tchaikovsky just
And
having some fun.
I'm afraid we don't have any Tchaikovsky to play you
Oh,
today.
alas.
Yeah, unfortunately. Let's go back over to America again.
Yes.
I'd like to play you an example of vocal groups. So vocal groups were a big deal at this time. Not barbershop quartets. Barbershop quartets, I think, we'd say a little bit later on. This is the Consolidated Quartet, a less rock and roll name I would challenge you to make, and it's called My Old New Hampshire Home.
My old New Hampshire home, sung by the Consolidated Quartet. Far away on the hills of old New Hampshire, many years ago we parted, Ruth and I, by the stream where we wandered in the gloaming. It was there I kissed my lover, said goodbye. She clung to me and trembled when I told her, and pleadingly she begged of me to stay. We parted, and I left her broken-hearted in my old New Hampshire village, far away. Now the sunshine lingers there, and the roses bloom and fair in the wildwood where together we would roam. In the village churchyard near sleeps the one I love so dear. On the hills of my old New Hampshire home. Now the sunshine lingers there, and the roses bloom and fair in the wildwood where together we would roam. In the village churchyard near sleeps the one I love so dear. On the hills of my old New Hampshire home.
My name's James.
And I'm Sean.
And we're playing music from the years 1890 and 1891. Let's come back to the UK once more. The most famous sound of all would be the chimes of Big Ben.
Yes.
Very familiar sound, but kind of eerie to hear it coming from so long ago.
Big Ben, Westminster, London, striking 10:30, 10:45, and 11 o'clock. July the 16th, 1890. Record made by Miss Ferguson and Graham Booth.
This is the news.
Yes, that's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, you got to do that, haven't
The
you?
Prime Minister today has announced. It's all.
Oh, there we go. That's the chimes of Big Ben. Sounds kind of I don't know, ominous, coming from so far away in history. The chimes of Big Ben, a good 25 years before the start of the First World War. Let's go back across to the USA and hear some more of the popular music they had at that time. This is the United States Marine Band with The Thunderer.
The Thunderer March, played by the United States Marine Band for the Columbia Phonograph Company, Washington, D.C.
So that was the US Marine Band again with the Thunderer March. Would you like to have a dance around the room to that?
Well, there's a theory that all history is cyclical, in which case at some point our chart toppers will again be this. So I look forward to the day when Velvet or anything like that in Cambridge is pumping out brass band music.
Is that the name of a popular nightclub that young people go to?
I think no, it's Vinyl even. It's Vinyl, opened recently. Other
Okay.
nightclubs are available.
I'm not aware of any, so it's all right.
So, well, if you want to play that, organise.
We're going to stay in America now, even though it's German. We're going to play a German patriotic song.
Yeah.
I think the German patriotic song that we probably are aware of these days is the German national anthem, which currently has different lyrics to the ones that you might think. But at this point, the famous German patriotic song, as anthems were not really codified at this stage, was Die Wacht am Rhein, the watch or the guard on the Rhine. So, have you heard of that song?
I have not heard of that song before. But of course, Germany has, obviously at this point, unified. Bismarck has just been sacked this year, actually. The great unifier of Germany by Kaiser Wilhelm II. Actually,
Poor Bismarck.
ironically, Queen Victoria's favourite nephew, and was at her deathbed. So,
But one place that German patriotism is not controversial is in the USA, who will not have any conflict with Germany for a good 25 years. This was written based on a poem written by someone called Max Schneckenburger. I just think that's a good name to say. Max Schneckenburger. Let's hear the original German patriotic song called Die Wacht am Rhein.
Die Wacht am Rhein, gesungen von Karl Bernhard, für die Phonographenkompanie Columbia. Laut ein Ruf mit Donnerhall, die Schwäche klirr und Bogenstall, zum Rhein, zum Rhein, zum Rhein, zum Rhein, wer will Ströme Schützer sein? Lebt Vaterland, magst ruhig sein, lebt Vaterland, magst ruhig
Okay, so there's the original German national song, Die Wacht am Rhein. Very patriotic and stirring.
Yes, well, it's interesting, of course, because there are a lot of German Americans. A lot of people have migrated to the United States in the latter half of the 19th century. And actually, this is a big problem come World War One, obviously, because there are a lot of Americans who feel closer to Germany than they do to England, especially in the Middle States in Ohio, New Hampshire, places like that. So it's interesting, though, that there is enough of a market for this, that people are recording.
Yeah. I mean,
German patriotic songs in America.
I think the thing at this point is you're trying to appeal to markets. So it's like, oh, there are German Americans. Let's get somebody to record the German national anthem. And then the Germans will buy that. And it quite likely worked. Another thing that worked was recording the most famous actor of his day, who was Mr. Edwin Booth. What can you tell us about this very famous actor, Edwin Booth?
Well, Thomas Edwin Booth is widely considered the finest American Shakespearean actor of the 19th century. He has also got a brother, who you may have heard of, called John Wilkes Booth, who shot President Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. What were the reviews of that?
Well,
not great.
Not great, but it's interesting, isn't it? As you were saying earlier, it's like having Jack the Ripper's brother acting in Othello. It wouldn't happen in Great Britain. But he doesn't seem to have hampered his career at all, and he lived quite a happy life. And he lived until 1893, so this is right at the end of his career.
Wow. So that's he wouldn't have been that old.
No, he was about 60. He was 60 when he died.
Yeah, people didn't live so long in those days, did they?
Quite a good innings, actually, for a man of his generation.
Yeah. Well, let's have a listen to the famous Edwin Booth. He's doing a famous speech from Othello.
Reverend, a very noble and a true good man. As I have been away the old man's daughter, I have married and engaged a
That was Edwin Booth, the brother of the man who killed Abraham Lincoln, with a speech from Othello, because he was a famous actor.
Yes, it's terms of that. It can give you the chills, doesn't it? Really, this man knew the man who shot Abraham Lincoln. And here we are listening. It's weird.
If you have a look on YouTube, there's an American game show from the 50s, and they have to guess the interesting thing about the guest. And the interesting thing about the guest they have is that he witnessed the killing of Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
Yeah, the guy's nearly 100 years old, and he was a small child, and he saw Lincoln killed in the theatre. And yeah, go and have a look at it. It's unbelievable.
So bizarre.
Okay, let's have a listen to some popular music. Last time we heard a woman, Miss Shaw. She was a famous whistler. We have some more artistic whistling now. If you listen to recordings from these years, artistic whistlers always perform the same song, and it's called The Mockingbird.
Mockingbird, whistled by Mr. John York Ashley, artistic whistling for the Columbia Phonograph Company of Washington, D.C., accompanied on the piano by Professor Geisberg.
So that's a tune called The Mockingbird, John York Atlee. What did you make of that?
Well, I was quite impressed that he can whistle so effectively, really.
Yeah, he was good at whistling. I mean, that was his job. But if that's your job, then you've got to do a good job of it. And yeah, I think it kind of comes out of bird impressions. He's going through his collection of different bird impressions. And that's one of the bird impressions that many of them put together into a single song.
There's a fair amount of whistling in jazz, is that? Do they have anything to do with each other, or is that simply just a cultural... Well, I think of Mr. Bojangles, mainly, but...
Okay. I can't think of any other examples,
Oh.
Fred. But, yeah, I think artistic whistling, as they referred to it there, was a big deal at this time. This is not quite the golden age of the minstrel show, but it's in that kind of ballpark. We're getting towards the end of minstrel shows is a big deal. So minstrel shows date back to the 1830s in the northeastern states of the USA. What you can say about the northeastern states of the USA is that they had no slaves there. That was the places that didn't have slavery. So it was kind of a taste of the South. Guy Thomas Dartmouth Rice, he had a very successful song called Jump Jim Crow, and that song was supposed to be based on a cheerful black slave who he met in the South, and he wrote a song about this guy, and that turned into the minstrel show, which was it's obviously got a bad name these days because it's white performers making their face black with burnt cork and performing horrible, distasteful caricatures of black people, and that remains the case. It's still horrendous and racist, and we can't make any excuses for it. However, it was the standard performing style of its time, and even when you get through to 1930s, as late as that, you still have an influence from the minstrel show in popular music, and it kind of interacts in some ways with early jazz and early country music. It comes from that kind of tradition. And even black performers would perform in blackface. They would make their skin darker in that way. Very racist, but it was the main popular music form of its day. So we have Jim Crow as one of the songs, Jump Jim Crow, and on the other hand we have another song called, I'm afraid this is the name, Zip Coon. And the cliche of these two characters, Jim Crow would be contented and old and not very clever, and the character of Zip Coon would be dangerous, and you can't trust him, and you have to watch out for him. Two racist caricatures that carry way through into the 20th century. This song was also known as Turkey in the Straw, and let's have a listen to Turkey in the Straw. This is one of the big songs of its time. It's a recording by a guy called Billy Golden. Lots of these singers who are performing these kind of hideous caricatures of African-American men are obviously white, middle-aged men who are performing artists as that's their career. Some of them have some positives we can give them as well. As far as Billy Golden goes, I'm not sure I have anything nice to say about him. I'm playing this purely as an example of the popular music of the time. And I'm not expecting anyone to appreciate this, but just as an example of the kind of endemic racism of the time, here we go.
As I was a-climbing down the road with a tired feeling and a heavy load, I cracked my whip and the leaf was sprung. Your horn busted your wagon down. I went out to milk, I didn't know how. I milked a goat instead of the cow. A monkey sat in a pile of straw. I went in his mother-in-law. The kid saw. I said, you I took about, turn about a high just fall. I hoop up the tune called Turkey and Strong. Turkey in the butt. You young turkey. I kick the ball, turn about a high jump home. I hoop up the tune called Turkey and Strong. Yes, indeed. I know that a nigger do love turkey. And I know that a nigger do love that possum. And chicken. Oh, hush, nigga, hush. Huh? Kadoo, needs to die. Ain't the time to do it. But look out, give that nigga some hog chicken and that'll make him hoop. But possum and gravy, running down that possum's back will make a nigger when his lips pull him to slack. I'll never do scandal. Well, as I was a climb down the road, I met Mr. Coffin and I met his toad. And one time Mr. Coffin would sing, that old song, cut your finger.
So there's Billy Golden with Turkey in the Straw. Not the most pleasant thing to hear, particularly. As far as the tune goes, I guess it held itself together a little bit.
I think it's interesting, though, isn't it? Because when you think to the fight against segregation in the 1960s, a lot of the people who would have been in Congress at the time would have grown up with this kind of song. And you can see how this image of an African-American as lazy and stupid and rather interested in food could affect your view, couldn't you? You could see, even if it's horrendously racist, but you can see how this image create
I think
a very
when you're describing history, if you say the USA had a problem with racism at this time, I think in a very simple way you could go, oh, slavery is over, so therefore it's all been sorted out. I mean,
it hasn't.
And I mean, I think let's go over the history of that a little bit, shall we? So slavery was over, of course, after the Civil War. However,
the 13th Amendment. However, effectively until the 1870s, the Union maintains military garrisons in the South to force southern state governments to allow African Americans to vote, at the point of bayonet. But of course, in the 1870s, President Hayes pulled the troops out of the South, actually to deal with striking workers in the North. And since then, southern state governments enact what's called Jim Crow laws, which either implicitly or actually explicitly ban former slaves from voting, from entering the same establishments as white separate but equal doctrine, etc., etc. So actually, in many ways, the only thing that's changed for African Americans, certainly in the South, and to a lesser extent, but still largely in the North, is that they're no longer legally slaves, but they have to work for less money. They're not allowed to use the same establishments. They're derided. They can be beaten up. If a black man is seen walking down the street with a white woman, he will be hung. He'll be burnt. He'll be beaten. So
this is the original time of the Ku Klux Klan.
Ku Klux Klan, exactly. But it's interesting again that the Ku Klux Klan becomes more prevalent in times of economic instability. America in the 1890s is doing quite well, but you also get the last flowering in the 1920s, the 1960s, when the South is not doing so well economically. So this is a potent mix of poor whites and who are not doing very well, and incredibly racist Southern governors who don't want the blacks to have the vote because they suspect they will vote in slightly more radical politicians and all the rest of it. So it's not a good time to be an African American in the United States, in fact, or even England, despite the legal abolition of slavery. As this song shows, it's just horrific.
Bearing all this in mind, how would you feel if I told you that the most popular, most successful musician of the 1890s was a black man?
I would ask how much money he made, despite being the most successful.
He didn't make very much money at all. He was paid for his time. I mean, he got more money than he would have done otherwise.
Yes, absolutely.
And the man's name is George Washington Johnson, George W. Johnson. He was found on a street corner where he performed his two songs, and we're going to hear one of his two hit songs. Although he only had two songs, he would record them many, many times a day. He would sit, at this time, a recording studio is a bank of cylinder phonographs. You've got a whole load, maybe 20 of those all set up. Put cylinders in, get them all ready, and then press go together. And then do it all over again. The reason is that you can't duplicate cylinders until much later. So that's what George W. Johnson does. He sits there every day, in many different sessions, singing this song over and over and over again. The song, I have to apologise again for the title, although, to be fair, it was a title that George W. Johnson came up with himself. And so I'm afraid the title of the song is The Whistling Coon. This is the biggest selling recording artist of the 1890s, George W. Johnson.
The original Mr. George W. Johnson will now sing Whistling Coon at the Edison phonograph work. I've seen in the time a damn very funny folk about the funny of our lino. The fellas in the big one. Well, all these black and the black room. You can talk until you can, but you never get the word. Very funny for your own food. The knock needs stop and jolly fun. But the rabbit way they do. Got the bird list, has a power list, which doesn't know why I do trouble you. He got the jungle in the hustle, he's only with the love of the beginning. He's an independent free and he's about to push a hand with a hand like a big bamboo. Say, I never heard him go for the pappy in my life, but he got me when he was a fool.
George Washington Johnson there with one of his two big hits. I don't want to say the name again. What did you make of George Washington Johnson?
It's quite jaunty, isn't it? And it's quite different from marching band music.
It's not marching band, it's not sentimental ballads. You can see why it sold so well. It's something different.
Yeah, it's something you can listen to and actually feel, despite the rather hideous name, something you could imagine listening to and kind of...
I think he was very outdated. Even 10 years later, he was kind of seen as a historical anomaly. But it's the biggest selling artist of his decade. And if you imagine how people are listening to music, it's not at home, it's not in the office, it's not in the street. This is in listening parlours. So maybe in a train station, they might have a listening parlour. So you've got nothing else to do. You're in the train station, you can come in and listen to... a cylinder. You get people to choose a cylinder for you, and you have a thing that looks like a stethoscope. You put that in your ears and you can listen. Imagine you'd never heard recorded music before. It would seem like a wonder.
It would be quite something.
But it's a novelty. It's a novelty, as we say. It's not how we would kind of understand music these days. What it reminds me of, when I was about 10 years old, I used to have a thing called a portable action replay player and keyring. I've got a picture of one here. It's a kind of a small plastic box, and it came with these little reels of film. And each of the reels of film had kind of 30-second clips, and they'd be like an action clip from a blockbuster film, or monster trucks or dirt bikes doing stunts, or that kind of thing. Have you seen that kind of thing before?
Yes, I used to have one that would play Star Wars.
Okay.
I remember when Phantom Menace came out.
So imagine that our civilization was destroyed, and 150 years later, you managed to dig a few of these out of the ground. What would your impression be of our civilization? It would be...
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be a correct one, put it that way.
We're not really getting a proper picture of the music of the time because so little remains, and so unseriously was it taken as a way to preserve the music of the time. It was novelty. Let's have a listen to some more of the popular music, which is band music, marching band music. This is not Sousa's band, not the US Marine Band. This is Hagar's band with La Medianoche. It alleges itself to be a Mexican song. I don't know if it really is Mexican. It does claim to be Mexican. It does sound basically like another marching band song. It does have a kind of slight Mexican tinge to it. See what you think.
The following Mexican dance entitled La Medianoche, as played by the United States Marine Band. Record taken for the Columbia Phonograph Company of Washington, D.C.
So there's Hagar's band with La Medianoche. Did you hear the Spanish tinge there?
No, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be basing it off.
Yeah, I can vaguely imagine it after several listens, how you'd imagine that was that kind of Mexican feeling. Mexican folk music will be very important later. We'll come into that 1900s. Not quite yet. Let's have a listen to a soloist. We've got the bands and we've got the soloist. This is a soloist called D.B. Dana. He's playing Cujus Animum.
Cujus Animum. Right on the cornet from Mr. D.B. Dana, the Edison phonograph works, Orange, New Jersey. Duplicate.
You're listening to Centuries of Sound, where we go on an audio time travel adventure to history. We're now in the year 1891. And let's have a listen to a famous name who died in 1891. It's not actually him. It's his son recording his last words. The guy's called C.H. Spurgeon. What can you tell us about C.H. Spurgeon? C.H.
Spurgeon is one of the greatest late Victorian preachers. He's often called the Prince of Preachers. He is a Baptist, very conservative, firebrand figure. He's well known for his speeches. Basically, he's known to be a very powerful speaker. He was apparently meant to hold his audiences in spellbound admiration.
And he's a local boy, I believe, as well.
I did not know, is he?
Well, his church is in Waterbeach, which is just north of Cambridge, where we're recording now. So, a local boy.
Local boy.
It's a famous church in Waterbeach. I'm sure there's some people listening in Waterbeach. You can go by his church. It's just the road to the station in Waterbeach. We don't actually have the voice of C.H. Spurgeon. We have the voice of his son, who's repeating his last words on his deathbed, which is a bit of a grim thing to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's got an apparently very similar voice. That's what people said. So it is almost like hearing the last words of C.H. Spurgeon. So this is actually Thomas Spurgeon saying the last words of C.H. Spurgeon.
For the truth of God is unchanging. If you wear the livery of Christ, you will find him so meek and lowly of heart that you will find rest unto your soul. He is the most magnanimous of captains. There never was his like among the choicest of princes. He is always to be found in the thickest part of the battle. When the wind blows cold, he always takes the bleak side of the hill. The heaviest end of the sword lies ever on his shoulders. If he bids us carry a burden, he carries it also. If there is anything that is gracious, generous, kind, and tender, yea, lavish, and superabundant in love, you always find it in him. His service is life, peace, joy. All that you would enter on it at once. God help you to enlist under the banner of Jesus Christ.
The final words of C.H. Spurgeon there, being performed by his son Thomas Spurgeon in 1891.
Apparently on a train.
Not on. It does sound like it's on a train. The audio quality at this time, obviously, is not very good. Most of that, though, is down to the degradation in these wax cylinders this is being recorded on. They're very susceptible to mould, and if they're not kept in a proper dry storage place, they will degrade. Even if they're kept in the perfect kind of storage environment, playing them breaks them because it's not as reliable as vinyl or shellac for that matter. It is a metallic soap, which, as you can imagine,
degrades.
A needle will cut into that and break it after 100 or so listens. That's about as much as you can get out of it. Okay, so we've had to listen to various music from the year 1890 and 1891. All of it is not so new to me because I've been putting it together in one of my mixes. And if you want to hear all of my mixes going up to the year 1907, you can come along to centuriesofsound.com, or if you want to email me any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions.
Fan mail,
hate mail. Not hate mail. Don't send me hate mail. The address you need for that is centuriesofsoundmail@gmail.com. So that's one word, centuriesofsoundmail@gmail.com. We have accounts on Facebook and on Twitter. If you want to come and follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you're welcome. Please don't follow me in real life, though. So what do you make of the music of 1890 and 1891? We have actually heard some music this time.
Yes, the sound quality's a lot clearer from even a couple of years ago. They seem to be getting better at it.
I think part of that is the choices I have. I think I've only used, let's say, 1/3 of the available music this time, which is down from about 100% last time, or near 100%.
Yeah.
Does sound a bit better.
Still not recognisably... There's few things I can see as recognisably modern, but then again, we are 110 years ago.
Yeah, we are a long time in the past now.
Yeah.
So you've been listening to Centuries of Sound on Cambridge 105 Radio. I've been James.
And I've been Sean.
You can catch up with us on our website at centuriesofsound.com, where we'll put up this show very soon. To play us out today, we have Sergei Taneyev, another recording made by Julius Bloch in Russia in 1891. He's going to play Mozart's Fantasy in C minor. Thank you for listening to the Centuries of Sound radio podcast. Centuries of Sound is a monthly mix of original music and sounds from a year in history. Right now we're up to 1927. To download full mixes and get a host of other benefits for just $5 a month, please come to patreon.com/centuriesofsound.